Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is widen. Let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear widen used can mean to make or become wider. Yesterday's verb was lengthen, right? We talked about how it sort of meant up and down. Here, widen is really more side to side. Related to this first definition is a second way to use the verb. It can mean to increase the width, scope, or the extent of something. I'm going to have a couple example sentences of this later. So you might sort of still think of that broadening or widening, just like the first definition. For now, you should know that widen is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing. That forms widening. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, widen, ends in a voiced N sound. This means the ed ending is going to just make a D sound, and I'm not going to add an extra syllable to the word. It should sound like this: widened, widened. Okay. Now, I don't have any additional phrasal verbs for us to study today, so instead, we can focus on doing a little verb tense review. Today, we're going to practice the present perfect and the present perfect progressive. We'll start with the present perfect. We sometimes use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present, but we can also use it to talk about completed actions that occurred at the or in the indefinite past tense. So this would be an example of it would be, I don't know exactly when something occurred. Was it last week? Maybe last month, last year? And it might not matter. We just may be interested in knowing that the action has been completed or that the action has been done a certain number of times, going from the past up until the moment we are speaking or the moment we are writing. Let's talk a little bit about how we make sentences in the present perfect. To start with the affirmative, we are going to have two parts to our verb. So again, you can see present perfect, two P's, think two parts to my verb. We are going to be using a present form of have and then the participle form of the verb. Because we're using the present form of have, we must pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we're going to use have and then that participle. But if our subject is he, she, or it, we'll use has and then the participle. Let's take a look at an example. The Department of Transportation has widened the road multiple times. Okay? So let's talk about what this sentence means. Perhaps the road started with two lanes, right? One going this way, one coming that, right? But it became a very busy road, so they decided, okay, we're going to have two lanes going in this direction, two lanes coming back in that. Still not, right? More and more cars on the road. So now we have three, right? The road has become wider, okay? That sentence is describing just that. Who knows how many lanes we're up to in this example, but you get the idea, right? That it's increasing in size from side to side. Now let's talk about making negative present perfect sentences. To do this, again, I start with my subject. I use have or has, then not, and then the participle form the verb. Here's another example. The pipeline for producing more doctors hasn't widened even though there is a nationwide physician shortage. That word physician is another word for doctor. What this sentence is saying is, right, there are not more ways or more schools presently that will allow us to produce more doctors here in the United States. I borrowed this sentence from an article that was talking about how many more people are getting care from nurses, nurse practitioners, and the like because we don't have enough doctors. Finally, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, I start with have or has, then I have my subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Has the achievement gap widened since the pandemic? There are many educators that look at how do students perform, and they will look at students based on their socioeconomic status. The idea of, are they coming from a rich family, a poor family? They will compare people by race and by gender. This question is not so specific as to what gap we're talking about or within which category, but we want to know, right, is it becoming larger? Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past, it continues into the present, and it may even continue into the future. There are some verbs that we could use in the present perfect or the present perfect progressive, and they would really have the same meaning. So I could say, I have taught for 10 years. I could also say, I've been teaching for 10 years. Those two sentences are going to have the same meaning. But it becomes really common for us to use the present perfect progressive when we want to stress how long an action has been continuing. Okay? Now, you might notice in my notes here, I also have present perfect continuous. Some teachers or even other YouTube videos use that term, and that's just fine. These two, progressive, continuous, they mean the same thing. The reason I say present perfect progressive is, again, you can see 3 letter P's, and I hope that can help you remember you need 3 parts to make your verb. So in the affirmative, or to make a positive sentence, we're going to start with our subject. Okay? And if our subject is I, you, we, or they, my first part of my verb is going to be have. Okay? The second part is going to be the participle been, B-E-E-N. And then the third part of my verb is going to be the ing form of the verb. Now, if my subject is he, she, or it, then I use has been and the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. Detectives have been widening their investigation. Okay, so remember that second definition of the verb where we talked about sort of making the scope of something bigger? This is a great example of it. So perhaps we have a situation where detectives kind of thought, oh, it's probably this one person, or maybe it's these 2 people. But now they're like, oh, we don't know who did it, right? We're going to have to look at some other possibilities, right? So they are widening that investigation. Now, if you want to make a negative present perfect progressive sentence, again, you always start with your subject, then you're going to use have or has, whatever matches your verb, then not, then the participle been, and then the ing form the verb. Let's look at another example. The divide between home prices and average incomes in the South hasn't been widening as quickly. This is a really big problem that many people in the United States are facing, and in other countries as well. So the percentage or part of one's income that is needed to buy a house has become dramatically different, right? The percentage has gotten larger and larger to pay for housing. So I was reading another article because I really enjoy the news, and this article was looking at different parts of the country. And so they were, in this paragraph, looking specifically in the South, right? And they were noting in Western United States, right, the amount that prices of homes were increasing versus what someone's average income, right? They're getting further apart, right? That distance. But here, because we've got the negative, right? It's not becoming wider. That's what the article was saying. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. To do this, I start with have or has, then I'm going to have my subject, right? And then the participle, and finally, the ing form the verb. One last example for us. Has the life expectancy gap between men and women been widening? Right? So this might be a question that researchers, doctors are sort of interested in studying and understanding. Generally speaking, women have been living longer than men, right? And this question wants to know that gap, the difference, right? Is it getting bigger, staying the same, or maybe it's getting smaller? Maybe it's changed. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some other words that are related to our verb widen. The first word we're going to discuss today is the noun with. This noun can have a couple meanings. One way to use the noun is to talk about the measurement or the extent of something from side to side. You might remember yesterday one of our related words was length, right? We were talking about measuring kind of from here to here, right? With, again, think side to side. So an example of this word in a sentence might be, what's the width of those windows, right? I want to measure in inches or maybe centimeters. What is it from here to here? Okay. Another way to use the noun with is to talk about the scope or the quality of covering or accepting a broad range of things. An example of this might be, he brings with him considerable depth as well as the width of experience. I saw a sentence like this describing a person who had recently been hired in a rather high-level role at a particular firm. And what this sentence is suggesting is not only does this person kind of have an area of specialization where they have deep, detailed knowledge, but they have a lot of different experiences. And maybe to help us understand that a little bit, I'm going to use something from my past. Before I was a teacher, I was a tax attorney or a tax accountant, kind of a little bit of both there. And in the United States, one can do a lot of work with corporate taxes. You could do work with partnership taxes. You could do work with individual taxes, estate tax, trust tax, state and local taxes, property taxes, right? We've got all of these different types. Some people I worked with really just focused in one of those areas. So I would use that word depth. They had a lot of depth in corporate tax, for example. Whereas other people I worked with did a little bit of all of those things. They had extensive width of knowledge. Okay. Now, another related word you might encounter is the adjective wide. This can have a couple different meanings. One way to use wide is to talk about the side-to-side measure. So something that is great or more than average. An example of this might be, this parking lot has wide spaces. Right? The opposite of this would be the word narrow, right? Where you feel like, oh, there's not enough room to open my car door. Here, plenty of room. Okay. A second way to use the adjective wide is to describe something that is open to the full extent. Okay? An example of this. Her wide eyes are so funny in that photo. Maybe you've seen photos or memes, right, where someone's eyes are very, very open, or kind of as open as they can be, that full extent there. That's what's being described. Another way to use the adjective wide is to talk about something considerable in size. An example of this: the team won by a wide margin. Okay? So if we're talking about soccer, we're not talking about them winning by a single goal, right? Maybe they won by 5 or 6 or more, right? That is a considerable difference. A fourth way to use the adjective wide means including a great variety of people or things. So, how you might hear this used: this restaurant offers a wide range of dishes, right? So, it's not like they just have a single thing or 2 or 3 things, but there are going to be many different options. So, here you might hear wide variety, wide range. Just know we're talking about kind of many options, many choices there. Wide, interestingly enough, can also be an adverb. If I use this as an adverb, I could mean kind of to the full extent, right? So maybe you've been to a dentist, right? A doctor for one's teeth, right? And the dentist says, open up wide, right? They don't want you to open your mouth like that, right? They want you to, right? Nice and large, as open as you can make your mouth. A second way to use the adverb wide can mean far from a particular point or a particular mark. An example of how you might hear this used: the shot was wide of the goal. Okay, so again, when using that soccer example, right, you want to send it kind of straight on, right? But sometimes it goes to one side. And so you might hear it described that way. You might hear wide left, wide right to describe it as well. One last thing for us to discuss today. Just like length could be a suffix that we discussed yesterday, wide can also be a suffix. And when we use it as a suffix, generally it means extending over the whole of something. An example of this in a sentence might be, are you going to the community-wide garage sales? Right? So some cities or areas, neighborhoods will have these events where kind of they pick a day, right? And like everybody's going to have their garage or yard sale that same day. Other ways you might hear this used, if you work for a large company, you might hear of company-wide emails, right? So it's not going to one department, it's going to everybody within the organization. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.